Hi. So, many people would expect me to talk about women. I spend a lot of time talking about women in my daily life. But today I'm not going to talk about women. I'm going to talk about how to start something from nothing, with nothing, expecting nothing. The Daily Mail described me as somebody who grew up in, well, quote, rural, poverty-stricken Romania. That label will never leave me because, you know, they are the best read newspaper in this country, so I have to own it. So I was brought up in a very poor country under communism in Romania with nothing. Before I fast forward a few years to talk about what other things I created in my life, I thought I'll dwell a little bit on my early years and talk about why with nothing is the start of my talk. When I was about 6 or 7, I was responsible in my family, I was the youngest of 3 children, to go and do the shopping every day. That was my daily routine. After school, I'd run around, buy the bread. I would normally queue because it was rationed. We didn't have anything. The shops were with nothing in them, as I said at the beginning of my talk. So my daily job was to magic things out of these shelfless, awful shops. And often at the end of the day, I would come both with bread, some sweets and other things out of the magical use of my parents' money. So I grew up, and I remember very clearly when I was about 10 years old, they sent me off to buy some butter. That wasn't in the shop normally, neither was milk. And I went into this queue, which was very long, full of adults. It must have been about 7 a.m. in the morning. And I fainted. I fainted from the surge of the crowd that pushed me to the very front, and I came back, and again with magic, from fainting with butter and milk. It was a really great day in my family. Why am I telling you this? It's because in order to have something as I was growing up in communist Romania, poverty-stricken as we were, I had to find things to sell or do in order to be able to create the dreams I was having for myself. So one of the things that I got to do was to sell the apples in our orchard in front of my mother's factory. I had to champion them because they were the red ones, unlike the neighbors who had the yellow ones, to try to get to fundraise for myself to buy the top I saw in the shop, which was the only colored shop that I could see in the shop, and I wanted it, as any child would want. I was looking for color in a very black and white world. As I was growing up, I decided to be a journalist. Communism had collapsed, and I decided that the world was a bigger world than what I had experienced to this stage. And in order to explore the world, I was very certain I had to speak English. But this language wasn't being taught in my village in rural, poverty-stricken Romania, and therefore I had to find a way to educate myself. I was already 16 years old, and I decided I would be not just a journalist, a reporter, I will be an international journalist. I will see the world and write stories of people's struggle, poverty-stricken lives, and share them with the widest possible audience in English. So I made this commitment to myself that I would teach myself English, which is what I did. I went off and took an A-level and campaigned for myself to be allowed to do this because the school didn't have a teaching and a committee that could examine me, so they had to make one. So you see, with nothing, I made something, which was to get my A-level in English in order to be able to pursue my dream of being a journalist here. And this is what brings me to London. I came to London as a journalist. I came to tell stories of people that had lived a life a little bit like mine as I was growing up. A few years later, once I qualified, I became a lawyer. I decided, you know, I had an education. I decided that I would start something from nothing. I wouldn't say I was still in a world with nothing, because I had managed to have a working life, to have an education. I was sponsored through my university education for scholarships and all of these, the generosity of many people. So I decided that it was time for me to give back and to start a business from nothing, from scratch, and see where it would take me. My idea was very simple. I saw a lot of women that were being pushed out from the workplace purely for having families. And I felt outraged. And so I decided that I would do something and start with £500, which is not nothing, but nearly from nothing, with no investment, no backing, and very importantly, with no status in the legal system that this country has. I was nobody. I was, in fact, worse than nobody, because I was somebody that came from rural, poverty-stricken Romania, which puts you in a very negative light. So with this background, with this label, I decided I will disrupt and I will do the right thing. And so I started this business, and I got 4 highly skilled women to join this movement and try to help me create a business that will solve a problem that I found was unacceptable. Why? Because as a child, growing up behind the Iron Curtain with no opportunity, I dreamt of the education that would bring me the freedom I was enjoying. I could not believe that I came into a country like England, into a city like London, where women, highly educated, highly skilled, with a completely different background and experience than me, could possibly be forced to have a shelf life because they had children. And if nobody was going to do anything, I was going to do something from nothing. So this is how I started a business with 4 people, 1 idea, and a baby in my hand. Because as it happened in the first year, I experienced what it's like to be a highly skilled woman with a baby that nobody wanted. Nobody wanted to give us business. Nobody was interested in what we tried to offer. But we persevere, because by being a child that fainted in the queue, I knew what magic looks like. You can make it to the end if you just stick with your ingredients and you make it happen. So fast forward a few more years, and I noticed another thing. I noticed women tended to be written out of all the stories. I then decided to create a charity. I created to tell the story of women in law from the beginning to the end. When did it all begin? Why is it so easy to write them out of history? What is it about these women that are so unwanted that we need to write them completely out of stories? So I wanted to foreground those stories and tell their life, to put these role models on a stage bigger than myself. So again, going back to the beginning, with nothing, from nothing, I expected nothing. I wanted to create a movement. I was really keen that we should understand the value and the contribution of these women to the legal system we had, their fight and all the effort they put through to just being there and wanting to achieve the best they could. But I didn't expect anybody to follow me. I called it the first 100 years, the journey of women in law. I discovered that before women could become lawyers, in 1919, within the last 100 years or so, they were deemed not to be persons by law. Women were classified and labeled, like myself. They were labeled as non-persons, and therefore it was a justified rejection to say a woman is not a person, she cannot be a lawyer, she cannot be a banker, she cannot be what she dreams to be. I couldn't take it because, as you can see, I do not like labels. Labels put you in a box, they follow you around, you can't escape them, but it wasn't about my label, it was about their label. I wanted to free them from this. So I created this movement expecting nobody to join me. That has become something much bigger than I ever envisaged. So I'm telling you this story about starting with nothing, from nothing, and expecting nothing, because really what I want you to take away from this is that when you put your magical power to play, something really incredible happens. You don't need a lot of many things, and many magicians actually have very few things that we can see that they play with, and suddenly some incredible stuff comes out of their hat. I didn't think I'd be a magician, and somebody said to me, I'm a hurricane. And actually somebody very early on referred to me, maybe they knew something about my rural life. They described me as a tractor. They were afraid of me because apparently I was so powerful and so overbearing and so unwilling to stop that I was obviously a very dangerous tractor. But regardless of that, actually with reflection I realized what I have been all these years. From the beginning to the end, I have been a magician. Thank you.